It's finally here, finally showed up after all of the shipping drama that the Dietz Foundation had to go through to get it to us. This is Littoral Commander, the Baltic. Been very, very excited for this game. One of my most anticipated games of the year. You may remember that Littoral Commander Indo-Pacific was on my top 10 games of last year. I have played it many times. Since then, I played a couple games in the new year. Everyone that I've taught it to has had a really great time with the system. We did a 3v3 team game locally a couple weeks ago. That was a lot of fun, but I've been looking forward to this one quite a bit, more even than I was excited for Indo-Pacific, because the topic and the geography are actually of higher interest to me. And I'm curious to see what the Russians bring to this system. We're going to take a look through their deck and see. But if you're unfamiliar, Littoral Commander, it's a grand tactical educational war game designed by Sebastian Bay, published by the Dietz Foundation. Had a chance to meet Sebastian at San Diego HISCon last year. That was a good time. He came and play tested my game. And we hung out for a lot of the weekend, chatting, getting to know each other. Obviously, he's deeply involved in the academic side of war games at Georgetown University and other places. Formerly in the Navy. This is a game that sort of simulates the command and decision space of what near future naval warfare is going to be, with the premise being that Littoral Regiment will be able to provide sea denial to naval forces, and we'll see what that looks like when we open this. This is a monster heavy box. There is what feels like an aircraft carrier inside this box, so let's get this open. So the first thing we have in the box is a folio here of all of the documentation. This looks to be the player aid. The player aids in Indo-Pacific were a single sheet. These appear to be fold-outs. That's actually quite nice. So this is a triple fold-out player aid. You've got the flow of the turn, how impulses for each team go. This is actually a much more robust turn sequence than we got in the Indo-Pacific. Talks about the sequence of combat. And then here we've got things about intercept, which I think is, this is so when you're intercepting a long-range attack with air defenses. Influence meter, kind of important. Cards that affect the influence meter, how you read the units. So the movement here, got what type of unit it is. This is a infantry platoon. We've got close combat values in green, long range values in red. The 6 here in both of these is the target to hit number on a d20. The 9 is the range, and then you've got things like interception, where you can intercept long range strikes and then resupply as well on some units. We'll see about that. Here's the sequence of play. This is more similar to what we saw in Indo-Pacific, talking about zones of reconnaissance, activations, actions you can take. Move and initiate combat with using your close combat value. Move and conceal, so hidden units in this game. Your units are going to be hidden face down. And when you do something with them, they'll become vulnerable. And a big part of this game is managing the initiative and revealing enemy units so that you can attack them before they can attack you. Move and resupply with resupply units, and play a JCC, which is... This is sort of the heart and soul of the game, and we'll look at the cards, but the cards provide just sort of an infinite tableau of possible things that you can bring to a scenario, strategies you can explore. I like to make this system, to me, the way I sell it to people is, it's Magic the Gathering if Magic the Gathering was about future naval combat. This is a new one. Move and or play an embarked persistent JCC. An embark capable unit may move and or play embarked persistent JCC. So I'm going to be curious what that's all about. If we flip it over, we've got examples of how you use the JCCs, which is really nice. This was sorely needed in Indo-Pacific. It was hard to explain this without showing someone an example. So this is really nice to have this flowchart. This is excellent. So really nice player aids here, and there should be 2 or 3 of these. There's 2 and 3. So so same as Indo-Pacific, you get 3. Typically, I would guess that there's 3, 1 for each team plus 1 for if someone's like refereeing the game. You get some submarine tracker documentation. This is sort of a hidden movement for submarine units. A sheet, you'll make copies of this. It does come with a lot of them, so maybe you can write directly on these if you don't mind messing them up. But there's a bunch of them here in case you have a lot of submarines. I photocopied mine. Here is the scenario book. We'll take a look at that in a moment. And here is the rule book. Now, interestingly, the Indo-Pacific one was staple bound. This one is perfect bound. And it feels a lot thicker than the Indo-Pacific one. And I would be curious to see why it is thicker. I'm going to take a look through this real quick. All right, so just flipping through this real quick, I don't notice any big differences from Indo-Pacific. Without a closer read, I probably won't, but it does appear they've given the rules more space, and there's a lot more examples of the concept, so maybe just more text overall in terms of explaining the rules, making them more clear. Here we can see the game components from Baltic. I'll get to that when we get to the maps, but it's not too different. There's a more graphic design here maybe than I remember from Indo-Pacific. Yeah, some more example images. But in general, the rules seem to be about the same, maybe just a little bit more detailed in the text in order to get the concepts across. But yeah, this looks all pretty familiar. I'd have to do a closer read. Here's a playthrough, an example of play at the back here, a reference sheet for the number and types of units and how far they move, and if you need just a unit manifest, that's pretty nice. Yeah, so this is getting into the submarine operations. Naval gunfire, this is new. I don't remember this in Indo-Pacific. Yeah, short-range naval gunfire. You can enable naval units to employ their naval gunfire as a form of combat action. That's pretty cool. All naval guns have a combat value of 1 to 6, range of 0, same hex, and infinite supply. You roll 4 dice that is doing naval gunfire. It reveals the unit, and naval gunfire cannot be intercepted. So it's basically naval ground assault, essentially, is what this is, how this kind of works out to. So that's kind of cool. That's pretty new to this to the system. We didn't have that in Indo-Pacific, but I'm sure you could backport that rule quite nicely. Okay, so it's an optional rule, it looks like. There's this interoperability network, different national forces, about how it affects the tactical network, JCC, and your sort of cyber command. Yeah, so there's optional rules there. It's kind of interesting. But yeah, this looks pretty much, with just some additional graphical upgrades, very similar to the Indo-Pacific. Maybe just with some better language, some more clarifications and whatnot. So yeah, so that's the rulebook. Quite thick, quite beefy. Not a hard system to play, certainly to learn. Maybe some concepts that are a little different than what you're used to. But again, I don't think this is a particularly complex game. The complexity is all in these cards. This is the U.S. Navy JCC, Joint Capability Card deck. This is a new one. This was not an Indo-Pacific. Anglico, an air naval gunfire liaison company. So that's a new type of unit, or a new type of capability for a unit. So increase the HP by 1, and once per turn, increase the LRS values by 3. That's pretty nice. Makes your attacks more potent. We have got a bunch of colored cubes to be tracking on the unit cards, the different stats, as well as some other uses. Blue is typically supply. Purple is going to be your air defense. Black is going to be your hit points. Green are your ground assault, and then red and orange are going to be your long-range strikes. We'll get those out of the way. We've got a bag of D20s, 5 each. This game is very fun in terms of chucking D20s. And then we've got all these decks of cards. So we're going to go and look at those. Here's the Russian deck, or some of the Russian cards, I should say. Yeah, looks quite nice. Here's some Americans. Looks like a split pack there. We've got these unit cards. So these are going to be all of the different units in the game get their own card. Tells you their starting values of health, long-range attack, air defense. These are Russian units, the red ones. These are going to be your U.S. Navy units in blue. I assume the Navy units are going to be similar. This is our Army HIMARS platoon, so that's cool. This is not a naval unit. And look at how much ammo that Army HIMARS unit has. Hitting on 14 or less, 18 shots. Yeah, you don't want to get near that. So yeah, some really cool new units in here. Let's get these out and I'll show you some of the counters themselves. We got the maps. I'm going to open those for sure. You can see there's a new terrain art on these maps that I actually quite like compared to Indo-Pacific. The Skittles map, as it's called by the designer. All right, let's get all this stuff out of the box. All right, so the counters. These are all very nicely done, pre-rounded on a thick brown core. Here we can see some of the military deception units for the U.S. Navy. We've got some, looks like, some artillery units. These are supply units here. We've got some, looks like land-based. Wow. You know what? Let me pull out the unit cards as well so we can see what kind of units these are. So if we look here, we got some infantry platoons. Those are pretty standard. In fact, I wonder if they're Army infantry platoons. We got some artillery, as you see, some very close range artillery for the Americans. Here we've got the Army HIMARS platoon. Those are going to be here, so just long range. What else we got in here? We got some Typhoon platoons. These are, okay, so these are these infinite range, really effective long range fires, but only a little bit of ammunition. This is mid-range fire, Typhoon batteries, 4 launchers, a command post, and various support vehicles equipped with multimodal variants of the SM-6 and Tomahawk missiles. So it's basically a mobile Tomahawk launcher, which is kind of cool. That is why they're so powerful, and the anti-air defense there is quite nice. What else we got here? Air defense artillery. This is going to be just a defense battery for ground. Yeah, and then we got some infantry platoons. So these are transported by joint light tactical vehicles and armed with loitering munitions, drones and so forth. Here's an armor platoon. So the units here are a little bit more basic than we saw in Indo-Pacific, which is kind of interesting. Some Marine Littoral Logistics Company, those are the same. Here's a recon platoon, so they're close combat only. Here's that's an intercept. Here's an ACV section. So this is heavy weapons, amphibious combat vehicles, and so forth. As we had those in Indo-Pacific as well. Just trying to look through here and see what else we got. We got another HIMARS section. This is an actual, this is different than the Army HIMARS platoon. This is got more ammo, and I got a secondary fire capability that's got longer range and is slightly better. That would be, what is it, armed with naval strike missiles and the HIMARS systems. So yeah. Those are going to be the sea denial aspect of this system. HIMARS sections. You know, if you've wanted to play around with this stuff, this is going to be a lot of fun. Here's a WASP class landing craft. So it's just got air defense on it, no weapons. Supply, forward support company for supplying. Air defense artillery again. Just trying to see if there's any naval units in here as we look at this. Here's, again, an artillery section with M777 howitzers. So a lot more, it looks like ground-focused units on the U.S. side in this game. Here's a Harper's Ferry class LSD. Again, just air defense, but it does interestingly have, you can embark. Okay, so these are the embarked units. I see. So this is an LSD. You're going to land units are going to be embarked on here, which is kind of cool. So you're going to have the ability to transport units navally. This looks to be its supply capability of some kind, supply ammo. Or I'm not sure what the blue is. I'll have to look at the rules on that, but that's pretty cool. So we're going to have, actually, you have the rules for embarking units. Striker Reconnaissance Troop. Very strong ground attack there. It's got mortars and tactical unmanned aerial systems. Here we get a DDGX. You'll see, remember that from the original game. So yeah, so there's a lot of nice stuff in here. Here's a San Antonio class LPD. Again, embarked units. And yeah, this looks like the dynamics of this game look to be quite interesting, that you can embark units at sea and then transport them. So all of these will correspond to these counters. And you've got special counters like proxy forces, submarines if you get them, special forces. Here's all the units, the task force markers. And then we've got the same for the Russians as well. Looks like it looks like the St. Petersburg Task Force markers were cut off on the printing, so they made a smaller version here, which is nice. And then the Russian units, some very basic infantry platoons. This one is terrible. What do we got? Got some air defense sections that are not very long range. We got some long range strike capability units. This 10-9 is pretty good. I'll have to look and see what those are about. And here's the Russian Navy, so 25 hex range on some of these, which is kind of cool. I'm probably going to butcher some of these, but that is a Gorshkov class frigate. So this is the Gorshkov class is the Russian Navy's newest generation of frigate. Also got some Staragushi class frigates. It's a corvette designed for naval escort duties and fire support for ground forces. That's a pretty good range as well. Got some more U.S. units under here. So those are kind of the Russian naval units. Here's a Slava class cruiser. Infinite range, guided missile cruiser. Yeah, this is going to be fun to play around with. Let's see, what else? MLRS platoon. That's the 10-9 we were looking at. Here's an Ivan Rogov class landing craft. Again, an embark unit, Kirov class cruiser. A lot of different Russian ships here. Udaloy class destroyer with infinite range. The Russian Navy does not look like a joke here. We've also got some airborne infantry platoons, some air defense platoons, airborne recon. Those are those really bad ones. But again, they're recon. Logistics company, their logistics a lot better than the Chinese in Indo-Pacific, which were just terrible. So yeah, there's a lot of fun to be had here. This is not just a reskin. Here's an airborne self-propelled howitzer. These are not, this is not just a reskin. There's a lot of different tactics you're going to need to use with these units because of their values and sort of what they bring to the table. All right, I want to look next at the maps. So here we have one of the maps. Sorry it is not folding. It was folded up pretty tight, so I can't get it to lay flat. But here we have Estonia, the Gulf of Finland, the southern portion of Finland, and then some of the rest of the Baltics around here, the Gulf of Riga here. You'll notice that the style of terrain on this map is a much more sort of satellite kind of style. The hexes still have the movement point value in the border of the hexes, but unlike the Skittles map from Indo-Pacific, you've got a much more sort of like aerial reconnaissance style to this. You can see some of the things here. We've got Turku, which looks like some sort of shipping facility, and an airfield there nearby. These tend to come into play in the scenarios based on like collateral damage and other things. Looks like Helsinki, that's the capital. Airfield, this may be like a military airbase of some kind. And so, yeah, I really like the looks of these maps. I think, from what I understand, they are going to go to this style for their future printings of Indo-Pacific. But it's very easy to read. The amount of movement points to enter a hex, you don't need a terrain effects chart. It's just the color. So green is 1, yellow is 2, orange is 3, and then sometimes there'll be prohibited terrain, although it doesn't look like, oh yeah, here's some right here. Prohibited terrain there. So, yeah, and it looks like these maps connect, so you might have a connection down here in the south. Let's open the other one. So the box contains 4 maps, and it's 2 pairs of 2 map setups, basically. Here we have the pair that creates the Eastern Baltic, and there's a Western Baltic, and I'll spread that out as well. So this is the map I showed you up here, Finland, Estonia, parts of Sweden. And then the second map, we get into Latvia and Lithuania. We've got parts of Kaliningrad down here, Belarus, Poland. This geography should look familiar if you watch my videos on Next Door Poland. It's got a very similar area covered. There's Gotland over here. So this is a bigger footprint than Indo-Pacific with a lot more land area to be maneuvering around. So it's going to feel like a much different game than Indo-Pacific, where that was primarily naval-based. There's going to be a lot of ground combats in this game, it looks like. But the maps look fantastic. Weirdly, they don't have an overlap, so they join like right up against each other like this. So that's both good and bad. I think it's good in terms of if you're putting plexi on it, you don't need to worry about plexi and map overlapping issues, but you definitely don't want to be bumping anything while you're playing. Interesting that they chose to do it that way. You can see that navigating here between Sweden and Finland, a lot of movement points, a lot of little islands to move around in. And the ground units can actually move through there as well, which is nice. I like the way that the map shows that both naval and ground units pay extra movement points to go through that archipelago there. This is going to be a blast to play. I cannot wait. Here's Poland down here. So let's take a look at the Western Baltic maps. It's going to be a very similar configuration, but we're going to be shifted over in this geographic area. Here is the Western Baltic map pairing. So we've got basically the interior of Sweden all the way over to Norway, and it looks like Oslo might be here. Let's see. Sandford. Yeah, right here. Oslo, Norway, right there. Sorry, I'm doing the splits over the map. So yeah, so this covers really pretty deeply into... Oh. Got it adjusted. There we go. There we go. Look at that. Really deeply into Sweden and to Norway, which is really awesome. You don't typically get that. And here we've got Kattegat, got Denmark, Copenhagen's in here somewhere right there. And then the Baltic Sea and the German coast. So is Hamburg on here? Neubrandenburg, Rostock is here. Lübeck, excuse me, is there. Looks like Flensburg is on the map as well. Yeah, Hamburg down here. So really a nice play area for these scenarios. This is going to be awesome to get set up and play. Nice mix of land and sea opportunities, Poland here. And I'm just very much looking forward to the larger scale of this. So yeah, there's a lot of really cool stuff with these maps here, and I think they look great. They look fantastic. They really capture the forested nature of Scandinavia and the Baltics. So I think the counters will look really nice on here. Definitely more contrast because the counters are using such a bright palette and this is more muted. I'll hopefully get some pictures of that up when I play this for the first time. I know there's a lot of people interested in this game. Okay, so now that you've seen the maps, let's go talk about the scenarios. Okay, let's take a look at the scenario book. It looks like we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 scenarios. That is almost double the amount of scenarios that came in Indo-Pacific. Now, Indo-Pacific has had some bonus scenarios posted on BGG, and the designer's been really good at about supporting sort of game player created content. And you can actually create your own scenarios with this system, which I think is one of its strongest points. So here let's see, scenario book talking about the instructions, creating even instructions about creating custom scenarios, which is nice. So meeting engagement, Gotland, Redux. So this is an introductory scenario. There was a meeting engagement scenario in Indo-Pacific as well. That was a really good way to come to grips with the system. It gave you a general deployment of forces and cards, so you didn't really have to make a lot of pre-game decisions, and then you could play, learn the mechanics, and take that knowledge into future scenarios. Highly encourage new players to play this. This is what I like about the scenarios is it gives you some sort of like narrative context around what is going on. So it looks like we've got 2 task forces on each side, how you get victory points, some special rules, which cards you're going to start with, and we'll look at those in a second. And then if you're a facilitator of the game, which this game is technically an educational tool, I am playing the facilitator right now in the scenario we are playing in Indo-Pacific. So this just gives you some notes if you're running a game to teach people some really nice stuff there. Baltic Resolve. This is something during the U.S. Naval War College's interwar period war games. Teams played out various contingencies against a diverse cast of opposing fleets. So in this scenario, this is a symmetrical scenario. So it's like a U.S. So two U.S. Teams against each other using similar units to test out decision making and what have you. So again, this would be another good learning scenario and much more symmetrical if you want sort of like an even match. Red Dawn, as we can imagine, this is a U.S. versus Russia scenario where Russia invades Estonia, which causes Article 5 to be invoked, and how the U.S. responds. So we've got a U.S. task force here. We've got a Russian task force trying to destroy all of Russia's rocket and logistics units on the map, which is kind of cool. This one probably be the one that I play first, since I find the Estonian region kind of interesting. We got a Chasing Shadows. This is early days in conflict across the Baltics. Russians push into Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia as NATO forces aim to break the momentum of the initial invasion, while the Russian Baltic fleet aims to exert sea control over the Baltic Sea. However, U.S. submarines and USMC small boat companies aim to destroy the Baltic fleet. So this is probably a very naval-heavy scenario. In fact, it includes submarines as well, which is kind of cool. You get some of the hidden movement aspect to it. Unseen Means. Unique challenge of trying to evacuate civilians from a dangerous region, all while under enemy missiles. Obviously, we see that all the time in Ukraine right now, which is horrible. The initial goal of the Russian team is not to destroy the U.S. fleet or murder civilians. They aim to embarrass and hamper the U.S. fleet's evacuations operations by unseen means. However, if they sense they cannot do that, combat is always an option. So this looks like it's kind of about the learning objective of this scenario is not to rush to combat, but to explore the tense gray space between peacetime and open conflict. I would guess there's some special events in this scenario having to do with collateral damage and whatnot. Yeah, so there's gray cubes that represent American citizens who need to be evacuated. They can only be embarked and disembarked on ports. And so you're probably incentivized not to attack. Some variance to it, which is pretty nice. Perilous Passage. Russian Baltic fleet is attempting to return to Kaliningrad. U.S. European Command has tasked a rapid response force of Marines to delay, disrupt, or destroy the returning Russian fleet. Without significant long-range strike, the U.S. Marines will have to rely on a combination of mines, unmanned systems, and other capabilities. So this is going to be a great scenario to look at how the cards can impact the battle space if you are vastly outnumbered. And that is really what makes this system so great. So how do you find synergies in your capabilities to affect the units on the map? I think that's a really interesting idea for a situation. Hanging by a thread, contested logistics. As the wider conflict in the Baltic rages, NATO and U.S. are steadily pushing back Russian forces across this theater. The U.S. Marine and Army Multi-Domain Task Force has deployed to the island of Gotland, establishing a critical base for long-range fires and sensing. And this allows the U.S. to maintain sea control of the Baltic. However, Russian forces plan to strangle the base and eliminate its critical logistical capabilities. That's kind of cool. So probably the objectives, Russia destroy the logistics units, the USU logistics units. That's pretty cool. So just a lot to explore here. I really do like the variety of the scenario design. You can see that they're not all designed by the game designer. Some of them are designed by others. This one, Baltic Siren, is trying to push into Latvia, the Russians, and they're trying to capture Riga. Several Russian battle groups across the country are fighting. And you get a U.S. Army, a U.S. multi-domain task force positioned around Riga to do a defense of the city, while a U.S. surface action group is attempting to reinforce those U.S. Units. So a little bit of naval, a little bit of land here. You can see how that works out. Russian roulette. So level of difficulty high. These typically are long scenarios. 7 turns, it's a long time in this game. How many task forces? Yeah, like 4 to 5 task forces aside. So this is going to be a much longer, probably all-day game. At least probably maybe 6 hours. This is a Marine Expeditionary unit doing exercises, and then it deploys it to the Baltic Sea with tensions with Russia, and Russia tries to seize Gotland, and U.S. is trying to be a deterrent. So all of these scenarios have different variants and victory conditions, and obviously you could even play the scenario with the exact same rules every single time, and based on what you choose from the deck, it's going to be a completely different experience. High replayability in this game. Dire Straits. Russian and NATO forces clash across the Baltics, and the fleet's trying to break out, and the U.S. has tasked a detachment of U.S. Marines and Army multi-domain to disrupt, delay, or destroy the Russian fleet in the Danish Strait. So this is going to be a Western Baltic map. That's kind of cool. 3v3 variant if you want to play on teams. This game is very fun in teams. A lot of command, interesting command friction between the players. This one is Crossroads of Kaliningrad. It involves forces in Belarus and Kaliningrad and Lithuania being in between them. Looks like there's a lot to explore here. This is a wide variety of scenarios, and there's 11 here, but you could easily make these scenarios play out into tons of different ways based on how many players you're playing with, what variants you're using, if you want to alter them with your own rules. This is a very solid system for that kind of thing, and I really, really like it. All right, last thing before we close this video, let's take a look at some of the cards. Just a quick look at the Russian deck and some of the new capabilities that come in this game with the Russians. There are some new U.S. ones as well, but I'll let you, if you pick this game up, discover the joy of the new U.S. stuff when you open it. But here's some of the Russian stuff. I tried to pick one from each domain, each color that's new in terms of effect on the game that I haven't seen in Indo-Pacific. And also talk a little bit about how the cards are used. So usually at the beginning of a scenario, you're going to have an amount of points to buy cards for their value here in the upper left-hand corner. And then sometimes on certain turns in a scenario, you'll be able to add more cards to your capabilities. And so much of the beauty of the game is going into a scenario with a plan for all of your card abilities and seeing what the enemy is going to choose, and then having to respond in real time when you get to another buy phase to try and counteract what they've brought. And there's just so much replayability with a system like that. So I wanted to show you a couple of the new cards here for the Russians. Here we've got this Airborne Early Warning and Control card, and this allows you to roll a die so whenever a friendly JCC attempts to detect enemy aviation, you get to add 2 to the detect values, making them easier to find, or you can increase all intercept combat values for the impulse by 1, so it increases your air defense. So this is a really nice card to pair with an air heavy strategy, or counter an air heavy strategy, which is quite nice. Here's a TOS 1A Solnsipyak. So this attaches to a ground unit, and it gives the ground unit ammo for having a long-range strike. And also it says reduce enemy fortification level by 1 if you do 1 HP of damage in an impulse. So there's some sort of fortification element happening in this game that I haven't yet seen or explored. There's also these new symbols on these cards that you can see. These are sort of space, what they're called space values. This is how much space these units would take up if they are attached to a unit that embarks on one of those embark-capable ships that we saw earlier. So there's an amount of space that those embarkations take up. And depending on what cards you bring into a scenario, that may take up all the space in an embarked ship and preclude you from putting units on it or other such things. So that's a new concept in this game, and I just flipped through the rules and found that. So there's a whole new section about cards and units taking up space on embark-capable ships, which is quite nice. It builds out that sort of system in the game. Here we have counter mobility ops. This requires a ground unit. You get to place an obstacle in the same hex as the host, and the host unit cannot move, but until it's removed, whenever an enemy unit enters the hex, their movement is stopped for 1 turn. So it slows down. This would be like hedgehogs and stuff. Slows down enemy ground units, and that's going to be really important in the maps that we saw with how many ground units are on both sides of the force pool. Here's poisoning AI. So this is kind of like a near future thing. This is an AI that affect other AI. So at the beginning of the turn, you roll 4 dice for every 1 to 9. Reduce the required success values by 1 for all enemy AI enabled JCC. So it makes the enemy AI cards a lot less effective, which is pretty cool. Can't be nullified, and it cannot be. It's once a game. So this might be something you spend big on early if you think the opponent is going to go heavy into AI. And then we've got the Kessler effect. I just really like this card. Kessler effect is a real thing. This is space debris, essentially. Playing this card requires 2 action points rather than 1. You roll a die on 1 to 16. All space-based JCCs, enemy and friendly, cannot be used for the rest of the game. If successful, decrease Russian influence by 4 and add 3 cubes to all tactical networks JCCs. So this is very powerful. This basically kills all space equipment that people have brought to the scenario, and just destroys everyone's tactical systems for aiming and using cyber warfare. So I think this is a really neat effect. This is a cool card. And though it does affect the Russian influence position, it can be very powerful if your opponent has gone with a space-heavy JCC setup for the scenario. So that's a look at just some of the new cards, some really cool stuff in here. I cannot wait to play this. We've got a giant stack of American cards as well here, and there's going to be new stuff in there. And I think this is going to be one of my favorite games of the year, and I cannot wait to get this played with the people who I've taught Littoral Commander. It's a fantastic system. It's very playable. It's very interesting. The emphasis is on decision making rather than really complicated rules. And so when you get into the headspace of playing it, it's a really joy to play. So that is Littoral Commander Baltic from the Dietz Foundation, which I would remind everyone is a nonprofit, which I think is an awesome idea. I love supporting the Dietz Foundation. They do scholarship activity and whatnot, and they're just running a really great program over there for their business. So definitely go check out not only this, but their other games as well. And yeah, congratulations to Sebastian and the co-designers of Littoral Commander Baltic and Jim over at the Dietz Foundation for getting this out the door. This is a phenomenal package, a lot of value in here for a crazy price. And if you like modern combat and near future hypothetical warfare, this is the system right now that I think is doing some really innovative, unique things for that genre of game that are really not found anywhere else.